On this week's 51%, we look back on some of our favorite stories and conversations from 2023. Hollywood speech coach Samara Bay teaches us how to embrace the power in our voices. Our associate producer Jody Cowan laces up for roller derby practice. And Dr. Heather Hirsch discusses how women can meet their menopause symptoms head-on.
All of a sudden, you can feel really railroaded or like blindsided by these changes in our body. And it really is like puberty in reverse.
I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. I'm Jessie King. Thanks for joining us, and Happy New Year. I thought before we dive into 2024, it'd be nice to look back on some of our favorite stories and conversations from 2023. Last year, we talked about everything from the challenge on the abortion pill mifepristone making its way up to the Supreme Court, to investing, estate planning, and mental health care. I thought I'd keep things a little lighter today, though. One of my personal favorite conversations in 2023 was with Hollywood speech and dialect coach Samara Bay. Bay has worked with actors like Rachel McAdams and Penelope Cruz, as well as politicians, business leaders, and creatives struggling with public speaking. Her latest book, inspired by her podcast of the same name, is Permission to Speak: How to Change What Power Sounds Like, Starting with You. And it has what I feel is a pretty interesting premise. Basically, for women and people of color, the way we speak is not always aligned with how we collectively think powerful leaders should speak, typically like white, straight, cis men. Meanwhile, we often change the way we talk in certain situations to fit in, to be taken more seriously, or to get what we want. Bay actually argues in her book that using your voice to get what you want doesn't have to be a bad thing, but she helps readers determine when to make those changes, when to embrace your voice as is, and how to overall find your own authentic voice, so that as more and more women find themselves in positions of leadership, we can change what power sounds like. So here's a segment on our conversation with Samara Bay about permission to speak.
If any of us Google how to sound more authoritative, or how do I sound like a leader, we'll all see the exact same answers. They're very, I would like to say, suspiciously consistent. Keep your voice low, right? We don't want anything high pitched that sounds like you're enthusiastic. That's way too naive. Speak at, this is all over the internet, 70 to 75% your normal speaking rate, right? So now we're talking pace, like a measured pace. Don't do too much swooping up and down pitch-wise. You'll sound, quote unquote crazy. Certainly don't have spontaneous emotional reactions. You'll seem unhinged again. And then, yes, the fluidity of speech, right? Hedging terms, which like sometimes fits into the category of and just. There's a lot of, quote unquote think pieces around women saying things like, if you know what I mean. Hedging is basically a linguistic term to capture anything that doesn't feel direct. So we can either say, do this for me, or we could say, hey, if you wouldn't mind, would it be okay if you could just grab that for me? I would super appreciate it. Thanks. But you and I both know, and all of us listening, especially for women, we know that that second version might get us what we want. So we're in this weird conundrum here where we're being told that leadership sounds like stereotypical men, but we often have picked up habits that are stereotypical of women, because proximal power, what happens when you aren't the most powerful person in the room, part of what works is when you make the most powerful people feel good by being indirect. So we've all picked up these amazing habits that have been super useful. And then sometimes when we are eyeing power in a new way, right, when we want to be that most powerful person in the room, we have to get to look at our habits we've picked up and say, which ones have been serving me in a certain role to play small that are no longer serving me, and how would I make that shift? The reason I wrote this book is that that's lost in these larger black and whiteification of either police women's voices or don't police women's voices. And I'm like, the reality of our lived experience lives in the gray area in between. In what rooms do we want to sound more like some version of ourselves that feels free? And in what rooms is that a gamble we're not willing to take?
In the book, you say that everyone has a voice story. What is a voice story? How do you figure out what yours is? And with all these standards that have been pressed on us, How do you identify like what your voice is in that?
To me, it's sort of like a money story. Like, you know how we all have crappy messaging around money, or fill in the blank, something that feels like, you know, a hot topic for you, body story. It's not just a story with a beginning, middle, and end, right? It's a story meaning myths, a collection of messages we've picked up, that we've internalized, that feel so close to us that we wouldn't even know what a different thought process would feel like. Often we have these around our voice, and often they were planted super early by like random comments. I mean, I've just accidentally ended up being a collector of these stories. So a girl just told me this past week, I remember in high school when I got laryngitis, it would always be the most exciting time because suddenly everybody would be complimenting me in my voice. Right? It's like so messed up. Like, okay, so when you lose your voice and it sounds like gravelly and like way lower, suddenly people notice your voice and they lean in and they go, oh God, that voice is so, you know, whatever. I mean, the word sexy comes to mind. Maybe that's inappropriate in high school, but you know, yeah. And then the takeaway from that, right, is that my regular voice, my healthy voice, turns people off. But don't worry, when I get sick and lose my voice, it's great. And how, you know, so obviously, in addition to some of the aspects of each of our voice stories having to do with like what our parents sounded like when we grew up, did we know that we had an accent that was different from our classmates or not? And, you know, did we go to college and kind of have an identity renaissance and leave some aspects of ourselves behind? And how do we feel about that? There's also this sort of stuff, these random comments that rattle around in our brain. And then I would pause it. There's this additional layer of kind of shame or awkwardness around why did we let that comment get to us? And some of the stuff I'm really interested in as we kind of clean out the mind gunk around our voices and give ourselves the opportunity to find whatever our voices that feels the most us, the most free, the most, you know, joyful, the most authentic, is what would a voice that feels good feel like? You know, everybody says find your voice. What would it feel like for your voice to feel found? So, you know, you ask, how do you find, right? There's a billion technical ways. I have a bunch of tools in this book because I'm a coach. So like, I love, you know, practicals, but it's also these big questions of what stories have I been telling myself and am I feeling ready to let them go?
I think personalizing the conversation like this book does, rather than just being like, women need to change, women need to be more direct, is really important. Because I think you're right. Like, what works best for you and gets you what you want could be different in each situation. I mean, you literally have situations where a female boss will shift to that more direct way of speaking that we tell bosses that they need to have. And then they get labeled too bossy, or a whole list of other names that I don't want to say on the radio, and things like that.
There's so much, right? I mean, I have a whole
Yeah.
chapter on tone, because part of what is rarely discussed is not just the what is coming out of our mouth, but the how, right? We can say something really directly, but if we do it with great love, I need you to do this right now, it will come across as different. And part of what I'm interested in, and really this is kind of like the you know, juicy suggestion for all of us listening here, is what kind of leadership would we prefer there to be more of in the world? And how do we be that every time we have the opportunity to speak, whether we're literally leading, you know, a discussion or on a podcast or asking a question, even if that's like the technically low status role in that, you know, power dynamic of a room. When you ask a question, so there's something kind of mischievous and delightful about thinking to yourself, the spotlight is on me. I get to be the kind of leadership I'd like to see more of in the world right now. Does that mean that I find a sense of delight in my question? Does that mean that I do have a little bit more pitch variation up and down? Because when we go up and down in our pitch, not clownishly, but realistically, the way we would with our friends, it codes for vulnerability. We're saying, I'm willing to be seen. And part of what I'm interested in zooming out is most of the advice we've all been given about public speaking runs counter to our actual lived experience of what makes us get excited when we're listening to someone speak. And I don't even mean like political speeches necessarily. Anytime anybody grabs a microphone, any reel that they make on Instagram, anything that makes you go, ooh, I want to share this, right? Your body has the reaction of, I need to share this. It's so good. That person is likely not following any of those rules that Google tells you. They are instead being emotionally available and what I call caring out loud, in a way that's like undeniably human and just isn't how this stuff is taught and isn't, you know, these old standards that I think we've outgrown.
Samara Bay is a Hollywood dialect and speech coach and the author of Permission to Speak, How to Change What Power Sounds Like, Starting With You. To learn more, check out her website. That's samarabay.com. Samara, thanks again.
My pleasure.
While the sport is open to everyone, women increasingly make up the players and leaders behind today's roller derby leagues. Back in June, our associate producer Jody Cowan stopped by a roller derby bout for the Albany All-Stars in New York's capital region to learn how the game is played and how leagues are trying to rebuild their rosters after the COVID-19 pandemic.
With helmets locked, mouthguards cheeked, and knee and elbow pads strapped firmly in place, about 30 women skate in unison around an oval practice track taped to the floor of the Blessed Sacrament School Gymnasium in Albany, New York. The skaters follow shouted instructions punctuated by high-pitched whistle blows that signify their next move, quickly shifting weight from their right foot to their left before bending down to a kneeling position, all while maintaining forward motion on quad skates. At the center of the oval, giving both instructions and encouragement, is Alexis De La Torre, a.k.a. Mary Payne. A league veteran from the Hudson Valley, Mary Payne wears many hats, serving as the coach during practices and as defensive blocker during matches or bouts. She credits a 2006 documentary on the Austin, Texas roller derby scene with sparking her interest in the sport.
I watched that, and it was completely definitive. This has to be in my life. I get to be part of this gang. I get to kick ass. I get to do all these fantastic things where I can really stretch and push my body to different limits. I get to entertain. I get to learn a whole bunch. And it's just this really encouraging way to be these little mini rock stars.
Once widely popular across the United States, roller derby has evolved from its relay race origins in the 1940s to become a full-contact, high-energy competitive sport that embraces the theatrics of pro wrestling, including the use of player pseudonym, and the punk sensibilities of 90s skate culture. Where the focus was once exclusively on spectator entertainment, going as far as to have scripted rivalries and bout winners decided before the opening whistle, today the physical contact is indeed real and the competitive spirit fierce. Mary Payne breaks down how the sport's play action takes shape.
You have 5 players on each team. On each team is 4 blockers and 1 jammer. The jammers are point scorers. The blockers are one of the few sports where we are playing offense and defense at the same time. When the whistle blows, the jammers start in the back of what's called the pack. Whistle blows, they take off. The initial pass for the jammers trying to get past the blockers is who determines who's going to have lead jammer. That person is going to have control over the next 2 minutes. From there on out, any scoring passes where a jammer passes a blocker's hips of an opposing player is where they start getting points. And then the lead jammer, depending on who's in the front, who has the most slaps, has control over when to call that jam. And they could potentially keep racking up points over and over and over, or vice versa. Okay, the other person's scoring, we're having a hard time getting through. Go ahead, hands on the hips, call it off. We got to control that.
In Albany, the All-Stars Roller Derby League is a skater-owned and run business recognized by the Women's Flat Track Derby Association. The WFTDA currently recognizes 427 member leagues across 6 continents. In a pre-pandemic season, the Albany League featured a full lineup of over 50 skaters that would be divided by skill level to form 2 competing teams, the WFTDA-chartered All-Stars and competing Brawl Stars, for exhibition matches. Now, however, Mary Payne says the league is in a rebuilding year.
We are now promoting again, recruiting again, trying to get more people back in. We're really, really fortunate. We've got a solid amount of new people coming back in with a sprinkle of some vets to really kind of show them the path laid out.
So what makes a good player? Mary Payne says a big draw to the sport is its inclusivity.
This is roller derby. It's not basketball. It's not soccer. These aren't things that we did in gym class in school. On occasion, we'll have people who are like, oh, I've been a speed skater, or I've been, ice skating for, all of my childhood, and that's rare. That's not the given. There's people that are like, hey, I've never played a sport, and yet I'm really attracted to this.
As practice breaks, skaters split off into groups for more focused instruction. Speaking with the players, they all seem to have different roles, interests, and reasons for joining the group. Skater Heather Topolsky, also known as Recordian, who commutes to practices and bouts from her home in Massachusetts, has been competing since 2011 and is currently an officiator with the league.
If you just need something to do on a Saturday night, you can be involved in roller derby just by going to watch a game. If you want to skate, cool. There's no pressure, at least with Albany, to move at a certain pace. You can take whatever time you need to. So If it's something you're looking for just to exercise and get your health up, whatever you're doing, come on down. It's all good.
The Albany All-Stars typically play against 3 to 5 competing leagues across the Northeast, although bouts are far between at the moment as the league continues to regroup and develop resources to support future matches. Mary Payne encourages those looking to get involved to learn more about the league at albanyallstars.com. For 51%, I'm Jody Cowan.
Lastly, we had multiple episodes last year that touched on aging, from how to prepare for old age and reduce your risk for dementia, to how people are finding love after age 60. There's one aspect of aging that almost no woman can avoid, though, and that's menopause. The transition your body goes through, usually in your late 40s, early 50s, at the end of menstruation. Technically, menopause is defined as the point in time that's exactly 12 months after a woman's last period, but the actual transition from perimenopause, that period before, to menopause, and then to postmenopause can take years. It can impact nearly every aspect of a woman's life, even increasing her risk for chronic diseases. Over the summer, we spoke with Dr. Heather Hirsch, founder of the Menopause and Midlife Clinic at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. In her new book, Unlock Your Menopause Type, Dr. Hirsch goes in depth on the different ways menopause can play out and how women can better face the transition head-on.
Symptoms can be very, very vast. We think of hot flashes. We think about Samantha Jones in Sex and the City too, like fanning herself, trying to stop hot flashes. But it can be so much more than that. It can really start with a change in mood, new anxiety, trouble sleeping, trouble staying asleep, trouble concentrating, joint aches and pains that all of a sudden affect your ability to exercise or do your favorite stress relievers. It can be, irritability, snapping at your partner, snapping at your children, snapping at coworkers. That inability to focus can change your productivity at work. It can change so many aspects of your life right when you really need to have your stuff together. Because we don't know a lot about how our body changes, because we don't know a lot about these symptoms other than hot flashes, it can just, all of a sudden you can feel really railroaded or like blindsided by these changes in our body. And it really is like puberty in reverse.
What are the factors that determine how early you end up starting menopause? I've always heard that if your period starts early, then it'll end earlier.
So that's not always accurate. That's not always true. Although a lot of people think that. Some of it is genetics. And that means really, truly without a crystal ball, we really have no good way of knowing. Sometimes it's helpful to ask for your mom's history or auntie's histories to kind of see when menopause was. Environment can play a role. So certain harsh chemicals, especially smoking or heavy alcohol or drug use, that can put you into menopause on average 1 to 2 years earlier. And actually, this is important because there's studies to show the later your menopause is, the longer you tend to live. So actually having menopause earlier doesn't necessarily mean immediately your lifespan's cut short, but it is another clue to your overall health. There are also some other medical conditions. So it could be surgery, for example. If we take both of your ovaries out, that's considered surgical menopause. And that could be to reduce your risk of cancer, a known cancer, sometimes things like endometriosis or ovarian cysts. So cancer could be a reason. Chemotherapy could also put your ovaries right into retirement pretty early. Sometimes medications used for endometriosis, like Lupron, is also going to put you into early menopause. So that's another big category. And then there are some women who experience menopause early. In my book, I call this the premature menopause type. And premature ovarian insufficiency affects about 1 to 5% of the population, where women will have menopause before age 40. And we think that's an autoimmune condition, although we're not entirely sure if there's not other genetic reasons for premature ovarian insufficiency.
I'm glad you brought up your book because you do have a new book coming out about unlocking your menopause type. I'm sorry, the exact title is Unlock Your Menopause Type. Let's go into some of those types, I guess. Like, what are some of the different types? I know you mentioned premature, but some of the other ones, and what should people know about them?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because there's a subset of women for whom I find mood primarily is affected by the loss of hormones and by menopause. And so I dubbed that the mind-altering menopause type. And the reason this is so important and the reason your show is so important is because women are often, unfortunately, treated as men. And that really means that you would think that in medical schools and residency training, we discuss how these hormonal shifts affect chronic diseases or even mental health, but we don't, unfortunately. And so I've seen so many women with mood disruptions, be it new anxiety, severe depression, ADHD, brain fog, cognition, women retiring early, leaving the workforce earlier, and getting misdiagnosed with whether it's bipolar, schizophrenia, major depressive episode. And it really could be, or in addition, could be menopause. One of the things I hope my book really does shed light on is that not all women experience menopause the same way. And it really has these huge ripple effects into society, into families, into the workplace. The other menopause type that I find really interesting is actually the silent menopause type, which is totally a 180 from even thinking about the typical hot flashes, is a woman who has really no symptoms of menopause. And the reason I wanted to bring light to this type in my book is because even if a woman doesn't have outward feelings or symptoms like hot flashes or dryness or night sweats, our bodies still change significantly with the impact of losing our hormones. And so it affects our bones very significantly. It impacts our brain health. It definitely impacts our cardiovascular health. And so women who have no outward symptoms, yes, they're quite lucky, but they still have to consider that their body's still changing, their risk for chronic diseases is changing. And it's so important that we include menopause so deeply in our conversations as we get into our 40s and 50s so that we do set ourselves up for a wonderful, many, many plus decades of our lives. And it's really my opinion, and why I am so passionate about midlife and menopause is that when we don't include this huge physiologic impact and we brush it under the rug and women are treated like men, we're going to miss so many important opportunities to intervene to really improve the lives of women.
Let's talk about menopause care and treatment then. If your symptoms are interfering in your life or putting you at risk of other things, what options do you have? And I guess this is where hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, comes into play. But I know that can sometimes make women nervous, at least the women in my life. There's been studies trying to link HRT to things like breast cancer. So what exactly is the history and risk there?
So this is a fantastic question. And truly, it's really individualized. But on my platforms, I do talk about hormone replacement therapy very, very commonly. And the reason that I do so is not because it's a one size fits all, and it's not because that's the only option or you're doomed if you can't or don't want to take hormone therapy, but it's because there are still so many myths and misconceptions about the safety and the efficacy of FDA-approved hormone therapy. So I do talk about it all the time. It was really in the 80s and 90s, hormone therapy was the gold standard for actually even all women going through menopause. And at one point, 57 to 65% of women were on hormone replacement therapy. Then the Women's Health Study, which was a really, really large randomized controlled trial run by the NIH, ended abruptly in the early 2000s. And this is the study that unfortunately really scared both patients and physicians from prescribing HRT due to an apparent increased risk of breast cancer and cardiovascular disease. Now, this has actually been debunked. Not that the Women's Health Study was wrong or bad, because a lot of people will say that. It's just that when the results first came out in the early 2000s, there was many data points that were not looked at. What we see from the Women's Health Study and many, many, many other studies since then is that when women take hormone replacement, which is an estrogen, a low dose estrogen, plus a progesterone if they have a uterus, within 10 years from their last period, who have symptoms of hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, bone loss, that hormone replacement therapy eradicates their symptoms, keeps them living longer, keeps them away from chronic diseases like heart disease, bone loss, and diabetes. And these women tend to do extremely well. And there's been many, many changes in the formulations and first-line prescribing practices of hormone therapy. So now a lot of clinicians, myself included, do a lot of transdermal estradiol that is FDA approved, because that's really important, and different formulations of progesterone like Prometrium that really have a very, very nice safety profile. So many women are good candidates for hormone replacement therapy. And the latest data shows that about 5 to 7%, it could be a smidge higher since after the pandemic, but about 5 to 7% of women are on hormone replacement therapy. And when you think about how big that drop is still, I would love to see in my lifetime if that goes up to, 20%, 25%, 30%, because I truly believe the biggest reason a lot of women are not on hormone therapy is because they never have a consult with a knowledgeable physician to really walk them through the myths and the benefits of hormone replacement therapy. Now, on the flip side, in 2023, a novel new non-hormonal medication came out on the market to treat hot flashes. And that's really exciting because it's wonderful to have more things in the toolbox. So if a woman says, I still just, I'm not ready for that, or I just don't want to, I always want to respect what my patients feel is best for their body, because they know their body the best. And it's wonderful now that we do have a few more tools in the toolkit. So this new medication works on the hypothalamus to reduce our core body temperature. How cool is that?
Now, aside from that, maybe if you're not comfortable, if you don't want to go the HRT route, if you don't want to go the medication route, what are the other things you can do to mitigate menopause symptoms and, feel your best?
Yeah, there's definitely a fair amount of things. Research shows that one of the best things is cognitive behavioral therapy, or even self-hypnosis, which sounds kind of silly, but it's really a way, when you feel a symptom coming on, how you can best regulate your body, your feelings, your emotions to tamper down that symptom so that you can get through it and then carry on with all the important things that you're doing. So cognitive behavioral therapy and self-hypnosis, while they seem kind of out there, actually is sometimes really nothing more than meditating or a mindfulness practice or a gratitude practice or journaling. We know that foods that are rich in phytoestrogens and soy isoflavones, which is typically what you would eat in a plant-based diet, can be really helpful in reducing hot flashes. I talked about the mind menopause type where mood is really disturbed. Maybe it's not hot flashes. And this is where movement really is medicine. And I might want to have you go out there and, do some boxing or do some a little bit higher intensity exercise. That might really increase your endorphins, your dopamine, your own body's happy neurotransmitters. And my last thing here, just to say, is, I see patients and women every day, and sometimes they'll say, I am doing all the things, Dr. Hirsch, I'm eating right, I'm exercising, I'm meditating, I'm journaling, I just can't sleep. And you shouldn't have to suffer through, because this is at the end of the day, a physiologic shift in your body. So if you are still suffering while you're doing all of these lifestyle changes, please talk to your doctor.
Dr. Heather Hirsch is a board-certified internist and the founder of the Menopause and Midlife Clinic at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. We spoke with her back in July. Her new book is Unlock Your Menopause Type: Personalized Treatments, Last Word on Hormones, and Remedies That Work. You can learn more about Dr. Hirsch at heatherhirschmd.com and hear all of today's 2023 look-back segments in full. You can check out our website, WAMCpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio in Albany, New York. It's produced and hosted by me, Jesse King. Our associate producer is Jody Cowan, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. Again, to listen to all of our episodes anytime, go to WAMCpodcasts.org or wherever you find your podcasts. And you can stay in the loop on all of WAMC's shows by signing up for our weekly newsletter Airwaves at WAMC.org. Next week, we'll kick off the new year in earnest. Until then, I'm Jesse King, 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along the way. The nightmare down the hallway, I had to learn how to look away. I lost my cool, no electricity, hot rain on the concrete, sweet